The boy collapsed on the dusty schoolyard just as the afternoon sun dipped behind the bleachers. His small hands clamped tightly over his ears, as if trying to hold back a storm only he could hear. Teachers rushed toward him, bewildered, because this child, little Theo, had been diagnosed as completely deaf since infancy. Yet the way his body trembled, the way his eyes squeezed shut in pain, told a different story. Something raw and unsettling. His father, Adam, sprinted across the field with the panic only a single dad could know, skidding to his knees beside his son as the crowd parted around them. "Theo, look at me," he pleaded, but the boy only whimpered, turning toward a distant loudspeaker that had just crackled with static. It was impossible. It was unthinkable, and yet Theo reacted as if the world had erupted in sound around him. A coach shouted for an ambulance, assuming a seizure or sudden neurological crisis. But Adam knew in his bones that something far stranger was happening. He had spent years watching his son, studying him, noticing tiny moments other people dismissed: head tilts, micro-reactions, flinches at vibrations no one else paid attention to. And now, lying in the dust, Theo was responding not to pain alone, but to noise. As Adam lifted him into his arms, Theo's lips trembled around a faint breath of a word that shouldn't exist in his world. A soft, shaky "ah," a sound that shattered everything doctors once declared absolute. The teachers stared. The children froze. Even the wind seemed to pause, unsure of what miracle or mistake it had just witnessed. Adam clutched his son tighter, blinking back disbelief and fear in equal measure. If Theo was truly hearing even incompletely, even painfully, then the last 8 years of medical certainty were built on sand. Dear viewers, this is not a story about privilege, technology, or miracles born in laboratories. This is the journey of a humble delivery driver, a single father who refused to accept the limits others placed on his child. It is a story about persistence in the face of indifference, and about the quiet strength of a boy who lived in silence but still tried to understand a world he was told he would never hear. Today, we explore how a misunderstanding, a misdiagnosis, and a father's unwavering hope unraveled a truth hidden beneath years of assumptions. Before we continue, if you believe that love, especially the fierce love of a parent, can challenge even the most unquestioned medical verdicts, consider subscribing and turning on the notification bell. And stay with me until the end of this video, because what unfolds from this moment on will reshape your understanding of what it truly means to listen, to fight, and to heal. Sometimes the most extraordinary breakthroughs do not begin in hospitals or research centers, but in the heart of someone who simply refuses to give up. A different kind of quiet. To understand what really happened on that schoolyard, we need to step back to a small town pressed up against a slow, muddy river, where delivery trucks rumbled more often than dreams did. Adam's life was built around other people's packages. Every morning, before the sun melted the mist off the water, he loaded boxes into the back of his aging van. Groceries, medicines, spare parts, things people ordered in seconds, but that took hours of his sweat and time to arrive. On the dashboard, taped crookedly above the radio, was a photo of a newborn wrapped in a white hospital blanket, tiny fist pressed against a red, scrunched-up cheek. That was Theo. Theo's mother had left before the ink on the birth certificate had fully dried. She didn't storm out. There was no screaming match, no smashed plates. One day, after a long night in the neonatal unit, she simply looked at the wires and monitors around the incubator, looked at the word hearing loss on a piece of paper, then looked at her own reflection in the glass and decided she couldn't do it. The next morning, Adam woke up in the plastic hospital chair to find only an empty coffee cup and a folded note with 3 lines that never answered anything. He had not been ready to be a father alone, but babies do not wait for readiness. When the doctors first said, "We think your son is deaf," Adam's mind went completely blank. He remembered the white coat moving, lips forming words profound, likely permanent, not responsive, but sound itself turned into a distant echo. They showed him graphs from a machine, little lines that barely moved where others should have spiked. They tapped on screens and pointed at shaded areas. "His cochlea isn't responding the way we'd expect," one specialist said. "We'll need to run more tests. But you should prepare yourself. Your child may never hear your voice." The words cut deeper than any instrument in that room. At the small provincial hospital near his town, the conclusion came quickly and confidently. The equipment was old, but the opinion was firm. Your son has congenital deafness, the ENT doctor said, sliding the file shut with a soft click that sounded, to Adam, like the slamming of a door. You should focus on sign language early. Don't waste time chasing treatments that don't exist. No one offered him a second opinion. No one suggested that sometimes machines are wrong, or that the human brain is more mysterious than a printout. He didn't know he could ask. He just nodded, stunned, as if the diagnosis were a sentence and not a question. That night, Adam held Theo in the dim light of their small rental house, listening to the refrigerator hum and the pipes rattle in the walls. Theo slept, chest rising and falling in tiny waves. Adam whispered to him anyway. "Hey, buddy," he said, voice catching in his throat. "I'm your dad. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm here. Okay? I'm here." Theo's eyelids fluttered but did not open. There was no startle at the sound, no little jump at the unexpected voice. The silence between them felt thick and permanent. From that day on, Adam divided his life into two halves. Before the diagnosis, when every future felt possible, and after, when every hope had to be rewritten. He worked longer hours, took extra routes, and learned to stretch every dollar. There were no grandparents to lean on, no siblings to help. Just a few neighbors who occasionally left casseroles on his porch, and the river that never changed. At night, when Theo finally slept, Adam's guilt would settle in like another body in the room. If I made more money? If I had pushed for another hospital? If I had studied harder in school? If I were someone else entirely? The ifs chased him deep into the dark. But amid the doubt, one conviction grew. If this was the world his son had been given, one without sound, then he would learn to live in it with him. Whatever it took. Theo's strange little habits. By the time Theo was 8, silence had become their family's second language. Adam had learned basic sign language from online videos and worn-out library books, practicing late at night with his hands in front of the bathroom mirror. His signing was clumsy, sometimes out of order, sometimes too slow. But Theo's patience was enormous. The boy would giggle silently and correct his father, guiding his fingers into the proper shape with small, warm hands. They developed routines built on visual cues rather than sound. A flick of the kitchen light meant dinner was ready. A wave from the doorway meant it was time to go. A gentle tap on the shoulder was the equivalent of calling Theo's name. Their home adjusted itself around the absence of hearing. The old analog clock in the living room was replaced by a bright digital one that Theo could read easily. Alarm clocks vibrated instead of ringing. The TV always displayed captions. When visitors came, rarely Adam would remind them, almost apologetically, "You can't just shout from another room. You need to get his attention first." On the surface, this was their normal, but beneath it, there were cracks that only Adam seemed to notice. It started with small things. One evening, as Adam unloaded groceries, a heavy glass jar slipped from his hand and shattered on the tiled floor. He swore under his breath, instinctively glancing toward Theo, who was coloring on the couch with his back turned. Theo's shoulders jerked. His crayon skidded off the page. His head turned sharply, not toward the movement of Adam's body, but toward the sound that should not exist in his world, the sharp crack of glass and the cascade of fragments. Adam froze. Maybe it was coincidence, he told himself. Kids shift and move all the time. The floor can vibrate, and he could have felt that, right? But then there were more moments. Sometimes, when a heavy truck rumbled past their house, Theo would look up from his drawings a second before the windows rattled. When a neighbor's dog barked right outside their thin front door, Theo's eyes would widen, and he would stare at the door as if expecting something to appear. The most puzzling thing happened in the kitchen one stormy night. Rain hammered the roof, and wind pushed branches against the glass. Theo was helping wash dishes, his small hands submerged in warm, soapy water. Lightning flashed, and a moment later, thunder cracked so loud it seemed to split the sky. Adam flinched. Theo did more than flinch. He jerked his hands out of the sink, spraying water across the counter, and pressed his palms flat over his ears. His mouth opened in a silent O, and he blinked rapidly, confused and afraid. Adam stared at him, the sponge slipping from his own fingers. "You're not supposed to react to that," his mind whispered. "You're not supposed to know thunder exists." "Hey! Hey!" Adam signed quickly, moving his hands into Theo's field of vision. "What happened?" Theo frowned, breathing hard. His small fingers moved clumsily. Head. Hurt. Inside. He pointed upward, then to his temple, as if trying to indicate that something had slammed into his skull from above. That night, after Theo fell asleep, Adam sat at the wobbly kitchen table with his laptop open and a knot tightening slowly in his stomach. He searched for phrases like, deaf child reacting to loud sounds. Can a deaf person feel noise? Misdiagnosed hearing loss children. Page after page appeared. Some talked about residual hearing. Some mentioned auditory processing disorders, conditions where the ears could technically detect sound, but the brain struggled to interpret it correctly. Others spoke about children who were hard of hearing but labeled as profoundly deaf because their responses had been inconsistent or misunderstood. He wasn't a doctor. He didn't fully grasp the terms. But a sentence here, a paragraph there, caught on his mind like burrs on clothing. Not all listening problems are due to the ear itself. Some children experience sound as pain or confusion rather than meaningful information. Early testing can be misleading, especially with outdated equipment. Adam sat very still. The local hospital had tested Theo when he was only a few weeks old. They had used machines he now suspected were older than some of the nurses. The appointment had been rushed, squeezed between other patients. Theo had been fussing and squirming in his tiny bassinet, while the technician adjusted cables and frowned at a flickering monitor. Could they have been wrong? He closed the laptop and rubbed his eyes, feeling almost guilty for even thinking it. The doctors had degrees, certificates, white coats. He had a high school diploma and a job that required no more than a driver's license and a strong back. Still, every time Theo reacted to something silent, a quiet rebellion grew in him. What if his son wasn't living in pure silence at all? What if he was trapped in a world of distorted, painful sound that no one had bothered to understand, accept, or fight? The pressure to accept the diagnosis didn't just come from doctors. It came from the school too. In third grade, Theo attended a small public school that proudly declared it was inclusive, with ramps at the entrances and posters about diversity in the hallways. The teachers were kind in the way that busy people are kind. They smiled, they nodded, they printed worksheets with larger fonts. But none of them knew sign language beyond a few simple words. At first, Theo tried to keep up. He watched the teacher's lips, tracked her movements across the whiteboard, and copied what other children wrote. But as lessons grew more complex, he fell further behind. Some kids were gentle with him, others were not. One afternoon, Adam was called into a meeting. He sat in a chair that was slightly too small for him, knees pressed under a low circular table decorated with crayon marks. Across from him sat the principal, Miss Harper, a woman with kind eyes and a folder thick with papers, and Theo's homeroom teacher, Mr. Lawson, who shuffled documents nervously. Mr. Reed, the principal began gently, "We're concerned about Theo." Adam's stomach sank. Is he misbehaving? No, she said quickly. "He's a sweet boy, very gentle. The other students like him, but academically, he's struggling significantly. Even with additional support, we're not seeing the progress we'd hoped for." She opened the folder and slid a printed chart toward him. It was covered in graphs and color-coded lines that meant very little without an interpreter. "We've been in touch with the district's special education coordinator," she continued. "They've suggested that Theo might be better served in a specialized classroom for students with more profound disabilities." "More profound?" Adam repeated slowly. "Children who need constant adult assistance," Mr. Lawson added. "It's a smaller group, less overwhelming. The focus is more on life skills than academic milestones." Life skills. The phrase landed like a brick. "You're talking like he can't learn," Adam said, feeling heat rise in his chest. "Like he's less." "No one is saying that," the principal replied softly, "but we do have to be realistic about what we can offer him here." Without hearing, and with the communication barriers, Adam cut in, hands gripping the edge of the table. "He reacts to sound," he said. "Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, I see it. Thunder, glass breaking. The neighbor's dog. Has not completely shut off." Mr. Lawson exchanged a glance with Miss Harper. She folded her hands. "Phantom reactions aren't uncommon in children with sensory impairments," she said carefully. "They may be responding to vibrations or visual cues. I understand it's hard, But the medical reports are clear, Mr. Reed. Profound congenital deafness. The phrase was a cage. On the walk home, Adam barely noticed the cracks in the sidewalk he usually avoided. Theo skipped along beside him, holding his hand, oblivious to the decisions being made about his future in brightly lit offices and crowded meeting rooms. That night, when the house was quiet, Adam pulled the old hospital file from a box in his closet. The edges were frayed, the pages worn from being read and reread in moments of doubt. The words were always the same. The conclusion never changed, unless it had been wrong from the beginning. The next day, between deliveries, Adam parked his van in a grocery store lot and opened his phone again. This time, he didn't stop at articles. He found forums, places where parents told messy, unedited stories about their children. Some of the stories were familiar: early diagnoses, specialists, acceptances. But others broke the pattern. Children labeled deaf, who later turned out to have different disorders. Kids who didn't respond on certain tests, but flinched at sudden loud noises. Parents who described the same strange reactions Adam had seen in Theo. One comment stood out: if you feel something is off, document everything. Record videos, track patterns. Bring evidence, not just feelings. That night, Adam sat Theo at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal and a small notebook. He taped a piece of paper to the fridge and drew 3 simple symbols: an ear, a face, and a lightning bolt. He invented a game. Every time Theo felt something inside his head that seemed connected to the world around him, whether a vibration, a feeling, or a pain, he was to tell his father. In return, Adam would mark it in the notebook, noting the time and what was happening in the environment. He also ordered a cheap sound level meter online, the kind used by hobbyists to measure decibels in different places. The reviews were mixed. It was not a medical device, but it was something he could use with his own hands. Within days, the notebook began to fill. Thunderstorms, loud trucks, slamming doors, the blare of a siren from a passing ambulance. Each time Theo reacted, Adam tried to capture it on paper, on his phone camera, or simply in his memory. To the world, it might look like a father refusing to accept reality. To Adam, it felt like the first time he was truly listening to his son. The day the speakers exploded. School sports day should have been simple. The sky wore a washed-out blue, and the field lines were freshly chalked. Parents huddled under metal bleachers, sipping coffee from paper cups and cheering as children stumbled through relay races and tug-of-war. Music played from 2 large speakers at the edge of the field, tinny pop songs with too much bass. Adam took the day off work, ignoring the ache in his wallet. He stood near the finish line, phone poised to record Theo in the sack race. Theo, in an oversized red shirt, bounced on the spot, grinning. His friends jostled him playfully. He watched the teacher's arm, waiting for the visual cue to start. When the whistle blew, Theo leapt forward with the others, burlap bags scraping against the grass. Adam laughed and shouted encouragement out of habit, even though he knew his son couldn't hear him. The race was chaos, children toppling over, bags twisting, teachers clapping. As Theo neared the halfway point, one of the old speakers crackled. The music glitched for a second, then resumed. Louder. Too loud. A teacher hurried over to adjust the volume, tapping the interface on the cheap sound system. For a moment, everything held its breath. Then it happened. A sharp pop, followed by a burst of high-pitched feedback that sliced through the air like a knife. The speaker coughed out a screeching, metallic scream before dying completely, leaving a shocked silence in its wake. Several children jumped, one started crying, a few parents winced, covering their ears. Theo didn't just jump, he dropped. He crumpled mid-hop, collapsing to his knees, then onto his side, burlap twisted around his legs. His hands flew to his ears, pressing so hard his knuckles whitened. His eyes squeezed shut, face twisted in agony. For a split second, no one understood. Then Adam was running. He reached Theo before anyone else, skidding on the grass and dropping to the ground beside him. The world around them narrowed to the small, shaking body of his son. "Theo!" he cried, even though he knew the name wouldn't land. His hands moved automatically into signs. "What's wrong? Where hurt?" Theo's lips moved soundlessly, breath coming in gasps. He pointed upward, then all around, as if the pain were coming from the air itself. Teachers swarmed, voices overlapping. "Is he okay? Is this a seizure? Call the nurse." The gym teacher shouted toward the bleachers for someone to get help. Adam's mind raced. This isn't a seizure. His body isn't spasming. Hes reacting to his gaze snapped to the dead speaker. You heard that, he whispered, more to himself than to Theo. You heard it. One of the staff crouched beside him. We're calling an ambulance, she said. He might need him taking him, Adam interrupted, already lifting Theo into his arms. The boy clung to his shirt, burying his face in his chest, still shaking. Ill drive. It's faster from here if I cut through the old road. The nurse hesitated but saw the wild determination in his eyes and stepped back. As Adam carried Theo toward the parking lot, the world beyond the field blurred. Children watched, wide-eyed. A few parents whispered. The broken speaker sat silent on its metal stand, a black box that had suddenly become an accusation. Inside the van, Adam buckled Theo into the front seat, angling his body so he could sign while still gripping the steering wheel. Loud? He signed with one hand. Very loud? Theo swallowed, tears streaking down his cheeks. His fingers trembled as he responded. Loud. Inside. Like knife. He pressed his thumb against his forehead, then dragged it outward, mimicking something cutting through his head. Adam's skin prickled. Not vibration. Not a guess. Not imitation. This was a description. You shouldn't be able to explain that, he said aloud, voice low and shaking. Unless they were wrong about everything. As the van jolted onto the road and the school disappeared in the rearview mirror, a new realization settled into the passenger seat beside him, as real and heavy as any box head ever carried. Theo wasn't living in silence. He was hearing in the worst possible way. The doctor who listened, the local hospital did what it always did. They checked Theo's vital signs. They asked Adam the same questions Head heard a dozen times before. They skimmed his old file, nodded at past conclusions, and suggested he might be sensitive to vibrations or overwhelmed by the crowd. They offered painkillers and a referral back to the same ENT department that had once declared the case closed. This time, Adam didn't stay quiet. He pulled out his phone and showed the nurse videos he had collected over months. Theo, flinching a split second after a car horn blared on the street, turning his head toward a slammed door, covering his ears when thunder rattled the town. He opened his backpack and produced the little sound level meter, scribbled notebooks of dates and times, a chart he had tried to create himself comparing the events. I know I'm not a scientist, he said, voice raw. But look at him. Look at this. Something's not right. You can't just say deaf and send us away again. The nurse hesitated, caught between protocol and the undeniable evidence of a father's obsession. Ill. See if the chief physician is free for a consult, she said uncertainly. Hours later, Adam found himself in a different city entirely. It was not the local hospital that finally saw him. It was the larger central medical center 2 hours away, after he insisted, begged, really for a referral and then drove there himself. Ignoring protest and the protest of his own exhaustion, the pediatric audiology department there was quieter, more modern. The walls were lined with pictures of children wearing different devices, hearing aids, cochlear implants alongside drawings filled with color. An older man in a gray sweater vest and wire-rimmed glasses introduced himself as Dr. Karoun. I looked over your file on the drive-in, he said, shaking Adam's hand firmly. You've been through quite a journey. Adam gave a humorless laugh. That's one word for it. Theo sat between them, swinging his legs slightly, his eyes scanning the room. He traced the pattern on the edge of the exam table with his finger. Dr. Karoun didn't speak right away. Instead, he took a small notepad from his pocket and began drawing on it simple sketches of an ear, a line to a brain, and little arrows. Can he read? The doctor asked. A little, Adam said. Small words. The doctor turned the notepad toward Theo. Under the ear, he wrote sound. Under the brain, he wrote meaning. He tapped the ear, then signed clumsily. Ear. He pointed to his own ear. Then he tapped the brain and wrote brain. Theo watched, curious. Sometimes, the doctor said, speaking slowly and clearly for Adam's benefit but also keeping his gestures big for Theo, the problem is here. He tapped the drawing of the ear. Sometimes, it is here. He tapped the brain. And sometimes, it is in the path between. He took a breath. I have read the original tests that labeled Theo as profoundly, congenitally deaf, he continued. The methods were outdated, to say the least. The readings were inconsistent. The interpretation was rushed. Adam felt his throat tighten. Are you saying they were wrong? "I'm saying," the doctor replied carefully, "that they may have only seen one piece of a more complicated puzzle. Today, we will run more detailed tests, not just on the ear's ability to detect sound, but on how the brain responds to that sound. It will take time. It may be uncomfortable. But if you're willing, I'm willing," Adam said immediately. "Whatever it takes." The tests spanned the entire afternoon. Theo sat in a soundproof booth with small sensors attached to his scalp. He wore headphones that delivered faint tones, bursts of white noise, clicks. Sometimes he flinched. Sometimes he grimaced. Sometimes he seemed to zone out entirely. In another room, Adam watched through a glass window, heart pounding as lines danced across monitors. He didn't know what any of it meant. He only knew that this time, someone was looking deeper than they had before. At the end of it all, Theo grew drowsy and dozed on a chair, a blanket tucked around his shoulders. Adam sat beside him, a hand resting lightly on his son's ankle, as if anchoring him to the world. "Doctor," Karun returned with a stack of printouts and a tired, thoughtful expression. "Mr. Reed," he began, pulling a chair close. "Theo's ears are not dead. They react. Imperfectly, but clearly. The hair cells in the cochlea respond to certain frequencies. There is signal." A flicker of hope sparked and then immediately collided with fear. Then why? Why does he not understand speech? Why does sound hurt him? The doctor nodded. "Because the problem seems to be how his brain processes what his ears detect. Imagine," he continued, gesturing with his hands, "that every sound is a letter. For most of us, the brain sorts those letters into words, then sentences. For Theo, it's as if the letters arrive all jumbled, wrong sizes, wrong colors, overlapping. Instead of a sentence, he experiences chaos." "So he's not deaf," Adam said slowly. "He does not appear to have classic congenital deafness," the doctor confirmed. "Instead, I suspect a severe form of auditory processing disorder, possibly related to delayed or abnormal myelination in the neural pathways that carry sound information to the brain. The signals get through, but they are distorted, delayed, noisy. Loud, sudden sounds might bombard those fragile pathways, causing pain rather than meaningful perception." He paused, letting it sink in. "In practical terms, this means that labeling him as profoundly deaf was both inaccurate and harmful. He has been living in a world where sound exists, but in a hostile, confusing way that no one around him has understood." Adam stared at the floor. His jaw clenched. "So, all these years," he said quietly, "while I was trying to accept a silent world with him, he was fighting a noisy one alone." The doctor's eyes softened. "You could not have known. You trusted the information you were given. Could this have been caught earlier?" Adam asked, his voice hoarse. "Perhaps," the doctor admitted. "If more advanced tests had been available. If someone had looked beyond the first results. If someone had listened to the little inconsistencies you saw. The truth is, our systems often rush to categorize. It makes paperwork neat, but children are not neat." He leaned forward. "What matters now is what we do with this knowledge. Theo may never process sound the way you and I do. He may always find noisy environments overwhelming. But with carefully structured auditory retraining, we may help his brain learn to make better sense of certain sounds, especially those that matter most." Adam blinked. "Retraining? Think of it as physiotherapy for the pathways between ear and brain," the doctor said. "Gentle exposure. Patterns? Association. We start with low-intensity sounds, pair them with clear visual cues, and give his brain time to build new connections. It is not a miracle cure. It is long, slow work. It will require enormous patience from both of you." He placed a hand flat on the folder between them. "I cannot promise outcomes, but I can promise this. For the first time, we are asking the right question. Not can he hear, but how does he experience sound? That is where healing begins." In that quiet consultation room, under the hum of fluorescent lights, Adam felt something shift inside him. The grief he had carried all those years did not vanish at bent. It made space for something else. Not certainty, but a chance. Training a brain to listen. The plan that unfolded over the next weeks looked nothing like the dramatic interventions Adam had once imagined when he thought of treatment. There were no surgeries, no expensive implants, no overnight transformations. Instead, there was a schedule. "Doctor, Karun's team provided a set of recordings, simple tones, gentle pulses of white noise, carefully filtered speech sounds. They came on a small digital device that Adam guarded more carefully than his own phone. Along with it came a thick packet of instructions. Short sessions, the doctor had emphasized. Consistency over intensity. Pair each sound with a visual symbol or a clear context. Make it a game, not a punishment. To make this possible, Adam made a decision that frightened him almost more than any medical risk. He quit his long-haul delivery job. The company manager stared at him across a cluttered desk. "You've been with us 7 years," he said. "You really want to walk away? In this economy?" "I don't want to," Adam replied. "But I need to. My son needs me home." He found part-time work instead, stocking shelves in the early morning at a local supermarket, doing odd repair jobs in the afternoons. The pay was lower. The margin for error in his budget became razor thin. But the hours between 10 and 3, when school ended and the world slowed, belonged to Theo. They turned their living room into a kind of therapy lab. On the wall, Adam taped rows of pictures, an image of a bell, a dog, a car, rain, a hand clapping. Under each picture, he wrote the corresponding word in big, clear letters. On the coffee table, he lined up small objects: a toy drum, a metal spoon, a glass jar, a rubber ball. The first weeks were the hardest. Theo would sit on the worn-out couch, device headphones resting gently over his ears. Adam would sit across from him, the remote in one hand, a stack of flashcards in the other. "We're going to do it together, okay?" Adam would sign before each session. "You and me. Team." Theo would nod, eyes serious. They began with the softest sounds, low hums, gentle tones barely above a whisper. When a sound played, Adam would simultaneously show a picture or object, exaggerating his lips and signs. Tone. Picture. Smile. Repeat. At first, Theo's reactions were vague. His face would tense slightly, his eyes would flicker. Sometimes he would look past Adam, as if searching for something that wasn't there. "Too much?" Adam would ask, signing. "Pain?" Sometimes the answer was yes. When it was, they stopped immediately. They switched to silent games, puzzles, drawing, card matching, reminding Theo that sound wasn't an enemy to be endured, but a visitor that could wait for a better day. Other days, Theo seemed almost bored. On those days, Adam fought the urge to crank the volume or skip ahead. Slow, he reminded himself. Brains do not rebuild in a single afternoon. Over time, patterns emerged. Theo tolerated low, rhythmic sounds better than sharp, unpredictable ones. He responded more calmly if he could see the source represented in front of him. When the sound of a bell tone was paired with a picture of an actual bell, then later with a video of Adam ringing a bell, the connection seemed less frightening. One breakthrough came on an otherwise unremarkable afternoon. They were working with recordings of rain, soft, steady, gradually increasing in volume. Outside, real clouds had gathered. The device played the rain sound at a low level, and Adam flipped the corresponding card. A cartoon cloud with droplets falling. Theo watched the card, then the speaker. His brows knitted. Slowly, he raised one finger and pointed toward the window. Adam's heart skipped. He paused the recording, listening. Outside, the first real raindrops had begun to hit the roof. Theo's eyes widened. He pointed back and forth between the window and the device, lips parting slightly in wordless realization. "Yes." Adam signed enthusiastically. "Same. Rain here, rain there." He mimed raindrops falling from the sky, then tapped the card again. Theo let out a small huff of breath that looked suspiciously like a delighted laugh. They stayed there for several minutes, toggling the sound on and off, watching the world inside and outside sync for the first time. Not every day felt like progress. Some days, Theo refused the headphones. Some days, he grew overwhelmed and retreated to his room, burying himself under blankets. On those days, Adam would sit in the hallway, back against the wall, listening to the muffled silence and wondering if he was doing the right thing or just torturing his child with false hope. Money grew tighter. Bills stacked in uneven piles on the kitchen counter. The van needed new tires he couldn't afford. A toothache throbbed behind his molars that he tried to ignore. Friends suggested he might be obsessing, that maybe acceptance would be healthier than endless intervention. But every time he considered giving up, he remembered Theo on the school field, hands clamped over his ears, face twisted in pain. He remembered the doctor's words. He has been living in a world where sound exists, but in a hostile, confusing way that no one around him has understood. If there was even a chance of turning that hostile world into something gentler, he had to try. Slowly, the sessions evolved. They moved from abstract tones to fragments of speech vowel sounds stretched out like taffy, consonants cushioned by silence. Ah. Oh. Adam exaggerated his mouth shapes, pairing each sound with a visual symbol and a written letter. They did not aim for words yet, just familiarity. Theo began to mimic. At first, it was barely more than breath, a faint exhale matching the rhythm of Adam's lips. Then, little by little, sound crept in rough, unsteady, but unmistakably produced by his own vocal cords. Sometimes, when he tried to echo a tone, his face would twist as if sorting it out physically hurt. But then there were moments when his expression shifted from discomfort to curiosity, like a person who has finally gotten a blurry image to come into focus. Adam kept notes of everything. He logged every session, rating Theo's tolerance, noting which frequencies seemed easier, which patterns caused distress. He brought these notes to each follow-up with Dr. Karun, who adjusted the therapy program like a tailor fitting a suit. "You're doing well," the doctor would say, flipping through the pages. "Both of you. This is not about perfection. It's about giving his brain more options." One evening, after a particularly good session with vowel sounds, Adam and Theo sat on the floor with a bowl of popcorn between them, a silent movie playing on the TV. Theo suddenly reached for his father's throat, pressing his small fingers gently against Adam's neck. Adam looked down, startled. Theo signed, "You sound here." Then, with hesitant curiosity, he moved his own hand to his own throat and attempted a long, slow ah. His eyes flew wide as he felt vibration under his own fingertips. It was as if he had discovered a new sense entirely. In that moment, Adam saw at the bridge they were building, not just in Theo's brain but between their two worlds. Brick by invisible brick, the word that changed everything months past. The calendar on the fridge filled with small checkmarks, each one a completed session, a tiny victory. Winter slid into spring, and with it came Theo's scheduled re-evaluation at the Central Medical Center. In the week leading up to it, Adam found himself more nervous than he had been even for the original diagnosis years ago. Back then, he had gone in without expectations. Now, he carried fragile hopes that felt as if they might shatter under the weight of a single discouraging sentence. On the morning before the trip, they sat down for what was supposed to be just another session. The sky outside was gray, light filtered through thin clouds. The living room smelled faintly of toast. "Well, keep it short today," Adam signed. "Tomorrow big day, today small practice." Theo nodded, settling onto the couch. He adjusted the headphones himself now, with a kind of quiet professionalism. Adam cued up the familiar sequence. Low tones, gentle rising patterns. Then the series of vowel sounds they had been working on for weeks. "Ah." The device played softly. "Ah," Adam repeated, pointing to his mouth. Then to Theo. Theo opened his lips and produced a small, strained ah, almost like a sigh. His brow furrowed, but there was less pain in it now, more concentration. "Good," Adam said, even though the word itself might still be more feeling than information for his son. He signed good, too, with a broad smile. They moved on. "Oh. Oh. The little sounds bounced between them like a simple, old-fashioned song. After several repetitions, Adam lowered the device volume even further and set the remote aside. He decided, on a whim, to try something without technological help. He placed a hand on his own chest, right over his heart. "Da," he said slowly, breaking the word into its simplest sound. He exaggerated the way his tongue touched his teeth, the way his lips closed at the end. "Da. D." He hadn't planned this. The word had slipped out of the part of him that had spent years whispering into a silence he thought was total. Theo watched his mouth, eyes narrowed in focus. His gaze dropped to Adam's hand on his chest. Silence stretched between them for a second, 2, 3. Then Theo did something he had never done before. He reached out and placed his own small palm flat over Adam's heart, mirroring the gesture. "Da," he breathed, barely audible. Adam's lungs forgot how to work. He stared, hand frozen. Theo's face twisted not in pain, but in effort. He tried again, this time watching both Adam's mouth and his own reflection in the dark TV screen. Duh, duh, he said, the second consonant trailing off, the vowel stretched, the whole thing wobbling like a newborn foal trying to walk, but it was there. It was unmistakably there. Not just sound, not just a random syllable. A word. A word aimed at one person in the world. Adam. Dad, he whispered back, because he couldn't help it. His eyes flooded. He grabbed Theo's hands, kissing his knuckles, his forehead, his hair. Laughter and sobs tangled in his throat. Theo looked startled at first by the sudden burst of emotion, then began to smile, a slow, radiant grin that seemed to light up all the parts of his face that had spent years holding confusion and frustration. He repeated the sound, testing it like a new toy. Dad. This time it was clearer. Softer, but unmistakable. Adam pressed his forehead against Theo's, hands shaking. You have no idea, he said, voice breaking. You have no idea how long I've waited to hear that. Theo didn't need to understand the words. He could read everything in his father's eyes. That night, Adam lay awake in bed, replaying the moment again and again. He knew that one word didn't mean Theo now heard like other children. It didn't erase the years of pain or the obstacles still ahead. But it was proof that sound and meaning could meet in Theo's mind and arrange themselves into something true. Proof that the work mattered. Aftershocks and small revolutions. The reevaluation at the medical center the next day did not feel like a test anymore. It felt like a confirmation. Theo went through the battery of assessments with a calmness that surprised even the technicians. He tolerated the headphones better. He responded more consistently to low and mid-frequency tones. In the speech lab, when shown simple visual cues, he could approximate sounds he had never attempted before. Ah. Oh. And, once, shyly, doctor. Karun watched with quiet satisfaction. Later, in his office, he summarized the results for Adam. Objectively, we can see measurable changes, he said, tapping a graph. His brain's responses are more organized. The latency in certain pathways has decreased. There is still significant difficulty, of course. But he is making progress that many would have considered impossible given the original label. What does this change? Adam asked. The doctor looked at him for a long moment. Medically, he said, it changes his classification. He is no longer simply profoundly deaf. He has a complex auditory processing disorder with residual hearing. That means he falls into a different category for services, accommodations, educational planning. He leaned back. But beyond the labels, it changes something far more important. It changes how people think about him. Not as a child who cannot hear, but as a child who experiences sound differently and needs to be reached in different ways. When they returned to their town, the ripples of this new understanding began to spread. Adam scheduled a meeting with the school again. This time, he arrived not just with worries and a thin folder of old reports, but with updated documentation from the central hospital, graphs, and a letter from Dr. Karun that explained the diagnosis in plain language. In the same small conference room, Miss Harper and Mr. Lawson listened as he spoke. Here is what we know now, Adam said, tapping the papers. Theo isn't simply deaf. Loud, chaotic sound overwhelms him, but structured, gentle sound, paired with visual information, can actually help him. Has been treated like someone who will never hear, so your strategies have been built on that assumption. But that assumption was wrong. He watched them process this. The way their eyes moved across the page, the way their posture shifted. The special education coordinator joined by video call, her image flickering slightly on a tablet propped up on the table. This means, she said slowly, that he might benefit from a different kind of classroom support. Visual aids, clear speech, reduced background noise, and perhaps assistive listening devices in the future. And sign language, Adam added firmly. We're not abandoning that. It's not either or. He exists between these worlds. He should be allowed to use all the tools available. No one argued. They began the process of amending Theo's educational plan. It was tedious. It was bureaucratic. Forms were filled, signatures requested, meetings scheduled. But underneath the paperwork, something fundamental had shifted. The system had to admit it had been wrong. Word of Theo's case spread quietly among the staff at the local hospital. Some welcomed the new knowledge, updating their protocols, recommending more comprehensive testing for infants flagged with potential hearing issues. Others grumbled about costs and time. An internal review concluded that their old equipment and limited procedures had likely contributed to oversimplified diagnoses in multiple cases. They issued a written apology to Adam, not the grand, public kind that makes headlines, but a small, sincere letter acknowledging the mistake and promising policy changes. For Adam, it was both too little and more than he had ever expected. Life did not suddenly become easy. Money remained tight. Therapy sessions continued. Some people in town still didn't understand, still spoke about Theo as that deaf kid, because it was easier than rewiring their conception. Loud environments remained overwhelming for him. He still preferred quiet corners, still relied heavily on sign language, but there were new possibilities now. One evening, as Adam waited in the aisle of the town library while Theo browsed picture books, he overheard another parent whispering about their own child, about confusing test results, about doctors who gave quick answers that didn't quite match what they were seeing at home. He turned, heart beating faster. "Excuse me," he said gently. I've been through something similar with my son. If you ever want to talk or compare notes, I'd be happy to share what we've learned." The other parent hesitated, then nodded. "Honestly, I would. I feel like I'm going crazy most days. Everyone tells me to accept it, but something doesn't feel right." A few days later, they met again. Then another parent joined. Then another. Within a month, the library's small community room hosted a loosely organized circle of chairs every Thursday evening, a group of parents with children who had hearing issues, sensory processing challenges, or diagnoses that didn't quite fit. They brought notebooks, laptops, tears, and laughter. Adam did not see himself as a leader, but he had something precious to offer. A story of not giving up, and practical experience navigating a maze that had once felt impossible. He printed out basic information about auditory processing disorders. He shared Dr. Karun's explanations, simplified into everyday language. He showed parents how to document their observations, how to advocate during appointments, how to ask for second opinions without feeling ashamed. They called it, half-jokingly, the listening club, not because their children listened better, but because, in that room, the adults finally listened to each other. Theo sometimes sat in the back during those meetings, drawing or playing with blocks. He didn't catch every nuance of the discussions, but he understood their tone. He saw the way people looked at his father with respect, with gratitude. On the way home one night, as they walked along the river under a sky dusted with stars, Theo tugged at Adam's sleeve. He signed, "You help other kids?" Adam smiled. "I try." Theo considered this. Then, with careful concentration, he formed a new word he had been practicing. "Help-ers," he said softly, the L a bit blurred, the S nearly swallowed, but the intent shining through. "Helpers," Adam repeated, feeling his chest swell. "Yeah, maybe we are." The river beside them rolled on, carrying the town's reflections downstream. The world had not transformed overnight. Hospitals still made mistakes. Schools still struggled. Sound was still, for Theo, a complicated visitor. But in one small house, near the water, and in a library community room one evening a week, something had undeniably changed. A single dad, once crushed under the weight of a misdiagnosis, had learned to question, to fight, to adapt. A boy, once written off as locked in silence, had learned not just to hear fragments of the world, but to shape them into the most important word he would ever say. Dad. And from that simple syllable, whole new stories were beginning. In the end, Theo's world did not turn perfect. It simply grew a little less silent and a little more alive. Yet between the storms of overload and confusion, he began to recognize gentler things. The patter of rain, the scrape of the library door, the low rumble of his father's voice shaping careful syllables. Adam still counted every coin and worked every spare shift, but the weight on his back felt different now, less like punishment and more like purpose. Every Thursday at the library, when other parents filled the small room, he saw his old fear in their faces and offered the one gift no specialist had given him permission to ask if the experts could be wrong. He could not repair broken systems alone, yet he could teach people to notice the tiny contradictions that don't fit inside neat diagnostic boxes. Dear viewers, this is what most real miracles look like. Not lightning from the sky, but one child forming a new sound, one parent refusing to step back, one town learning to listen differently. If this story has moved you, let it remind you that expertise matters. But attention and love are also forms of medicine. Ask the extra question. Believe what you see in the people you love, even when the paperwork calls it impossible. Somewhere tonight, another single dad may be sitting at a kitchen table with a notebook, and because of stories like Theo's, he might hold on long enough to hear a word he once believed was gone.